Welcome to Avoidant Decoded, where we uncover the psychology behind emotional distance, silence, attachment, and the behaviors that are often misunderstood in relationships. If you want deeper insights like this, consider joining the Avoidant Decoded membership and become part of a community dedicated to understanding what happens beneath the surface of avoidant behavior. Two people can go completely silent after the same breakup, yet feel that silence at two completely different times. She may feel the loss immediately, while he feels relief first, only to realize what he lost when she has finally found peace. And that is the part most people misunderstand about avoidance. Their emotions may not disappear, they may simply arrive late. By the time he finally feels your absence, you may no longer be the person waiting for him to return. Two people can enter silence at exactly the same time, yet experience that silence in completely different ways. The breakup may be the same, the distance may be the same, and there may be no contact on either side, but emotionally, they are not standing in the same place. One person feels the absence almost immediately, while the other may not fully process it until much later, and once you understand that difference, you begin to see why her silence can feel painful from the beginning, while his first reaction may actually be relief. That delay is one of the most misunderstood parts of dealing with an avoidant. When you cannot see what is happening inside someone, it is easy to assume that nothing is happening at all. But silence does not automatically mean indifference, and the fact that you are not seeing a reaction does not mean there is no emotional reaction underneath the surface. So the deeper question becomes this: if no contact feels like it is doing nothing, does that really mean it is not having an effect? To understand that, you have to look at what the same silence can feel like on both sides. If you have experienced something like this, think about which side feels more familiar to you. You may be surprised by the answer. For the empath, the person who tends to be deeply emotionally attuned, the absence can register almost immediately. As soon as communication stops, the empty space begins to feel meaningful. Her mind may start going back through the final conversation, examining every word, every change in tone, and every moment where she sensed that something was different. She may wonder when the connection started slipping away. She may replay what happened and search for an explanation that could make the ending feel easier to understand. While the other person may appear completely unaffected, she can already feel the loss as something immediate and real. This does not necessarily mean she is being dramatic or overthinking everything. For someone who is highly sensitive to emotional changes, the nervous system can respond strongly when an important connection suddenly disappears. The familiar communication, attention, reassurance, and emotional presence are suddenly gone, and the mind naturally tries to understand what that absence means. That is why the beginning of no contact can feel so heavy for her. The silence is not simply the absence of messages. It becomes a space filled with memories, unanswered questions, uncertainty, and the emotional weight of everything that was left unsaid. For her, silence rarely feels empty or meaningless. It can feel like a message in itself. The moment the connection disappears, her mind may interpret that change as evidence that something important has been lost. She notices the distance, feels the shift, and begins emotionally responding before there has even been enough time to understand what happened. There is another layer to this that is easy to miss. For someone who becomes deeply connected to another person, closeness may provide more than affection. It can create a feeling of stability, reassurance, and emotional grounding. So when communication suddenly disappears, she is not simply missing the person. She may also be missing the sense of security that came from having that person present in her life. That is why the first several days can feel much more painful than the situation might appear from the outside. The pain is not necessarily about one unanswered message or one final conversation. It can be about losing something that had quietly become part of her emotional balance. Now look at the same silence from the avoidance side, because this is where people often misunderstand what is happening. His first emotional response may not be sadness at all. It may actually be relief. That does not automatically mean he never cared or that the relationship meant nothing to him. It can simply mean that his nervous system experiences distance differently. When the relationship becomes quiet, the pressure may suddenly disappear. There are no immediate expectations to respond to, no difficult emotional conversations, no questions about where he stands, and no feeling that he has to provide reassurance before he knows how to express what he feels himself. For someone who tends to associate intense closeness with emotional risk, space can initially feel calming. His system may experience distance as safety before it experiences distance as loss. This is why the early stage can be so confusing. You may be hurting while he appears completely fine. He may continue with his normal routine, interact with people, post online, work, laugh, and behave as though nothing significant happened. From the outside, it can look like he has already moved on, but outward calm does not necessarily tell you what is happening internally. Sometimes the emotional processing simply has a delayed timeline. The feelings may not become accessible while the relationship still feels emotionally demanding. His mind may first need the tension to settle before it can recognize what the connection actually meant to him. In those first days, he may not be sitting around thinking, "I have lost her." Instead, he may simply notice how much quieter his life feels. There is no one asking for clarity. There is no emotional pressure he feels unable to handle. There is no immediate demand for vulnerability. The relief can feel very real, but relief is not always the final emotion. As the distance continues, that initial sense of freedom can gradually lose its intensity. The quiet that once felt peaceful can begin to feel noticeably different. There is more space to think, and without the relationship constantly creating emotional pressure, memories can start returning in unexpected ways. This is where the two timelines begin moving toward each other. Her emotional reaction often comes first. She feels the loss intensely, processes the breakup, moves through the uncertainty, and eventually begins finding her own balance again. The pain that was overwhelming at the beginning can slowly become something she understands, rather than something that controls her. His process may move in the opposite direction. He begins with relief, but as that relief fades, the emotions that were pushed into the background can become harder to ignore. The absence becomes more noticeable, memories become more significant, and eventually he may begin to understand the emotional impact of the connection only after there is enough distance for him to actually feel it. That difference in timing is why silence can be so deceptive. One person may think, "I'm hurting, so I must be the one who cares more." The other may think, "I'm not hurting yet, so maybe I never cared." Neither conclusion is necessarily accurate. People process attachment, loss, and emotional closeness at different speeds. What looks like indifference can sometimes be emotional delay, while what looks like overwhelming attachment can eventually become healthy processing and self-reconnection. The important thing is not to measure someone's feelings by how quickly they react. Emotional timing tells you something about how a person processes connection, but it does not automatically tell you the depth of what they felt. For him, the emotional impact may arrive much later than she ever expected. And this is where one of the most confusing parts of the entire dynamic begins. The moment he finally starts noticing the silence, feeling the absence, and considering reaching out can happen at almost exactly the same time she has stopped waiting for him. That timing can feel almost impossible to understand, but it does not necessarily mean either person did something wrong. They were simply processing the same experience at different speeds. It is like two emotional clocks were started by the same event, but neither clock was moving at the same pace. This is often the part that feels most unfair to her. She had to experience the hardest part of the separation without knowing whether anything was happening on his side. She felt the uncertainty, wrestled with the memories, questioned what went wrong, and slowly learned how to live without the connection. There may have been no visible sign that he was processing anything at all. Then, just as he begins to understand what the absence actually means, she may have already changed. She is no longer sitting by the phone hoping for a message. She is no longer analyzing every small sign. She is no longer emotionally frozen in the moment he left. The version of her that was waiting for him has gradually rebuilt herself. That is not simply unfortunate timing. It is what can happen when two people have very different emotional processing patterns. From the outside, it may look like one person finally cares only after the other has stopped caring, but underneath that appearance, two completely different emotional timelines may simply be reaching the same point at different moments. So what happens when those timelines finally collide? He may eventually reach out, expecting to encounter the person he remembers. He might not expect desperation, but he may anticipate some obvious sign that she is still emotionally where he left her. Instead, he encounters something completely different. She is calm, not distant because she is trying to punish him, not pretending to be unaffected, not acting cold to make him jealous. She simply seems more settled within herself than she was before, and that difference can communicate something that weeks of silence never could. It shows him that life continued. The world did not stop while he was away. She continued moving forward, rebuilding her emotional stability and becoming comfortable with a life that no longer depended on his presence. That realization can make the absence feel much more real. Ironically, this can be the point where emotions that once seemed distant become much harder for him to dismiss. The feelings were not necessarily created by her calmness. Her calm simply removes the illusion that she is still waiting exactly where he left her. He can no longer assume that the connection is permanently available whenever he decides he is ready to return, and that is why her peace can have such a powerful emotional impact. It does not demand anything from him. It does not chase him. It does not attempt to force a reaction. It simply communicates that she has found stability within herself. At that point, He may finally recognize the difference between having space and actually losing access to someone who once mattered deeply. But none of this should be viewed as a competition over who suffered more or who handled the silence better. No one truly wins a period of no contact. The deeper lesson is that two people can experience the same ending while their emotional systems process it in completely different ways. One may feel everything immediately and slowly recover. The other may feel relief first and only later begin confronting what the absence means. And sometimes, by the time the second person finally understands what was lost, the first person has already learned how to be whole without it. That is the strange timing of emotional distance. You cannot always judge someone's feelings by how quickly they react, and you cannot measure your own healing by whether the other person eventually comes back. Sometimes the greatest shift happens when you stop waiting for their emotional clock to catch up with yours and start building peace on your own timeline. If you want to understand what can happen when an avoidant finally realizes that you are no longer emotionally available in the same way, Avoidant Decoded will break down that dynamic in the next analysis. Until then, remember this: silence does not always reveal who cared more. Sometimes it reveals who learned to process the loss first. Sometimes silence does not mean the connection meant nothing. It means two people are processing the same loss at completely different speeds. She may heal while he is still finding relief, and when his emotions finally catch up, she may already have found the peace she once searched for in him. The real power of no contact is not making someone miss you. It is giving you the space to stop waiting and become whole again. And when you no longer need their return to feel complete, their delayed realization no longer controls your story.